Hi, welcome back to my channel, S.Running, and this is Matthew the Midfoot Runner, and this is my 30-kilometer review of the Brooks Hyperion Max 3. So something I want to try and do in my videos is cut to the chase and get to the conclusion on shoes at the beginning, because I know that you've got better things to do than to sit around and listen to me ask sort of rhetorical clickbait questions like, is this the best Brooks shoes ever? Which it's not. That'll be in my next video, the Brooks Hyperion Elite 5. So we'll just jump into it and tell you, what do you need to know about this shoe to make a good decision on whether or not you're going to purchase it? And to start, we should talk about the elephant-sized cutout in the room. So this medial cutout can really destabilize the shoe depending on your mechanics and turn even a mild pronation into a really sticky situation for you. And to show you what this looks like, let's take a look at my gait in slow motion from both sides a couple times through. So here you can see me striking pretty neutral on the outside. Everything looks fairly normal. Just take a look at it again and freeze it. See the foam crumpling. So it's a pretty neutral foot strike. But now let's look at it from the other side. So you can already see there I'm starting to roll in. So let's take a look at it again, but freeze it. There. So you can see at the front that it's caving in on me and I'm not making it onto the forefoot fast enough for it to catch me. So it just sort of stays crumpled in that position, and that's what you really need to look out for with this shoe. But that said, if you have neutral mechanics or just really strong ankles, then I genuinely think that this shoe could be a contender for shoe of the year for you. The other thing worth noting is that the weight of this shoe is pretty substantial, but the shoe does disappear on foot when you get running, so I wouldn't let that bother you too much. And then there's the upper of this shoe. It has what I'd call a relaxed race fit that really contours to the foot really well. And between the knit upper and the engineered mesh, it really locks you down onto the platform and allows you to make use of the dual foam compound. And it's this midsole that's probably the star of the show. Brooks is using a dual foam setup with their DNA Flash V2, which is a supercritical EVA foam along the bottom as the carrier. And then they have their new DNA Gold PIBA-based foam along the top as the true super foam in this super trainer. And to my mind, this is probably one of the best dual foam setups I've ever seen in a shoe. As a result, the ride is energetic, it's protective, it's propulsive, it's everything that you would expect out of a super trainer, and I would argue this is the best example of a super trainer to date. All right, so let's talk about the specs. And really, there are only two specs you need to know about with this shoe. One is the stack height. So we've got 46 millimeters of stack in the back, 40 millimeters in the front for a 6 millimeter drop. And on my runs, this shoe certainly feels like a 6 millimeter drop, where some shoes with super foams and things can feel like a different dynamic drop based on how much you squish into the platform. This one feels like a 6 mil drop. And then the other thing is the weight. So I said that it's pretty substantial, and in the sample size, it comes in at 251 grams or 9.9 ounces. And in my UK size 12, it comes in at 350 grams, which is pretty heavy. Now that puts it about 4 grams lighter than the new Adidas Prime X Strung 3. So this sort of pits it directly against that. But I would argue that this shoe does a better job of weight distribution, because I do not feel this shoe on my foot as much as I did, especially I ran in the Prime X Strung 2, and that one felt incredibly heavy and just awkward on my foot, where this one feels a lot more balanced and it disappears on my foot. So let's talk about where a lot of the weight for this shoe comes from. And I think a lot of it is going to be coming from the upper. And if we start with this sort of back area of the shoe, the heel and the midfoot, we can see that it's made out of a knit material that sort of wraps and essentially forms a gusset to these two bands down either side, and it creates almost like a booty construction in the back. And it's quite thick. There's quite substantial padding towards the rear, which really helps. You don't end up with any heel slip in this shoe. And then there's a very substantial heel counter in this shoe. It's quite rigid in here. And I'll talk about why I think that's in here, because I think it's compensating for something. But then for the rest of the upper, you've got this engineered mesh moving forward, which is really nice, light and airy, very breathable. You can see right through it to the interior of the shoe. And the way that this stuff is woven, it does a really good job of sort of forming and contouring to the shape of your foot. So it gives you that, like I said, relaxed race fit where it really locks your foot into the platform, but it's not quite as constrictive as a typical race day shoe. In terms of some of the other little details, you've got a pull tab in the back, which just helps you to get it on, although it's easy enough to get it on, even though it's one of these booty constructions. But one thing that I didn't really like about the upper, and I'll show you because I've taken the laces out of my other shoe, you can see this pad that runs down the middle of the tongue. Now, normally I would welcome a pad on the tongue to help cut some of the lace bite out. The problem is this one, it feels like they just took some of this knit material and sort of rolled it up and stuffed it down in there. So it has kind of an odd feel. It's almost like a lumpy pillow on there. So when you tighten this down with the laces, if the laces sit on top of one of those lumps, it can kind of put some pressure onto the top of your foot where it's supposed to be protecting you from it. So I wish they would maybe change this and more evenly distribute the padding that's inside of here, maybe use a traditional foam or something. And they certainly don't need the pad to go all the way down the tongue down here because you're not really getting lace bite down here. So it's another opportunity to save some weight and improve the fit of this upper. So we'll go from the top of the shoe straight to the bottom, and we'll come back to the midsole in a minute. I'll keep this simple. In the dry, this grip works great. On everything that I ran on, blacktop, sidewalks made out of cement, dry dirt pack, a little bit of rocky ground and things, this grip works just fine. Now the problem was, on my first run, I ran into a rainstorm. And when it got wet, what I was noticing was each time my foot would plant, I would slip just that little bit. It causes your body to tense up, thinking that you're going to slip and slide. And when you do that for miles on end, that can get really fatiguing. So that's something to watch out for, is this grip is a little dicey in the wet. But on the other hand, you also do have quite a bit of rubber on the bottom. You can see it is quite thick. So in terms of durability, this outsole looks like it'll be good for, upwards of 300 to 500 miles, no problem. Although one other thing I wish they would have done, they've got a couple spots here where they've sort of made indentions into the rubber, and I almost wish they would have just cut these pieces out to maybe shave those extra few ounces or micrograms, whatever, off of this shoe to make it a little bit lighter. All right, so we've done the bottom and the top. So now let's go to the magic middle. And this is really what's going to make or break this shoe for most people. So I talked a little bit about the dual compound or the dual layer foam in here. The Brooks DNA Flash V2 does an amazing job as a carrier foam. It was never really a super foam, even though they tried to sell it as that on a few shoes. But as a carrier or a stabilizing foam, this does a really good job in this shoe. In fact, it actually makes this shoe very democratic for different foot strikes, because if you look at it from a heel striker's perspective, unlike some of the EVA carrier foams that are out there that can kind of deaden or mute the sensation of the shoe, this one does a really good job. It still has quite a bit of pop, and if you land as a heel striker, it moves you very quickly into your midfoot and onto your forefoot so that you can make use of the DNA Gold PIBA foam. If you're a midfoot striker like me, you've got a good balance here in this midfoot between that firm, stable carrier foam and then the PIBA kind of coming into play here. So you get a really nice soft sensation if you're landing laterally, so really neutrally. That then pushes you forward and leans you into the rest of that PIBA at the front. So it works really well for midfoot strikers. And then if you're a forefoot striker, you're just landing on this big slab of PIBA foam towards the front. And it's not substantially wide up here at the front, but it's wide enough. And you've got this little channel in here, so it allows that foam to just sort of push down a little bit more, and you get a really nice soft landing and a really good spring off by way of both the rocker and all of that PIBA foam. But where that can become troublesome for some people is, like we said earlier, this medial cutout. So it has its advantages, but it definitely has its disadvantages. I think one issue is that because it is so aggressive and deep and it goes forward in the shoe rather than coming back like we see on a lot of shoes, this sort of carries the destabilizing effect forward in the shoe. And so what happens is if you overpronate to begin with, or say you're fatiguing towards the end of the run and you start to tip in, you tend to hit this, and this part it just continues to be unstable, and you just sort of keep rolling on it. So really what you need to do in this shoe is you need to land laterally, or very sort of neutrally, where you sort of ride up this outside part and then pronate across into the flat part of the forefoot. And this part right here, I feel like if this was even just, a centimeter further back, it would catch you quicker. But as it is, when I was running, when I would fatigue and I started to roll in, I didn't get to this point of the shoe early enough, and I would start rolling, and then I just sort of kept rolling. So I had to be really mindful about keeping my mechanics really neutral and keeping my form good, so that I would ride up this lateral edge and up this big wedge of foam that's on here and make it up this far, so that I then would pronate onto the wider forefoot of the shoe. When I did that and was able to make use of the PIBA foam really well, the ride on this was just stunning. I mean, it is a really good ride. So overall, if you have neutral mechanics, then I think that this combination of foam in the shoe, regardless of how you strike rear, midfoot, or forefoot, is really going to be a great ride for you. Okay, so just to recap some of my likes and dislikes of this shoe. First thing is this foam combo. This is a really good foam combination, and I think it's going to be good for a lot of runners, regardless of your foot strike or anything else, as long as you have neutral mechanics. But the ride of this is just energetic, it's protective, it's propulsive, it's a really nice riding shoe. Also, the fit, despite sort of this being a little bit too thick for my liking and maybe having too substantial of a heel counter for some people, because if you have sensitivities back there, this might be too stiff. Overall, the fit of it is something that really locks you into the platform. Like I said, it has that sort of relaxed race fit, so it's just a really good fit on foot. And in terms of dislikes, obviously the big one is, for me, this medial cutout. If you're not impacted by that, you don't pronate, you might not have as many problems, but for me, this really destabilizes the shoe for me. Then also the collar and the heel counter, like I said, this is just a little too substantial for me. I really would like to see them be able to shave some of the weight off of this so that it doesn't feel quite as claustrophobic in the heel. And then the last one is just the grip in the wet. So this is a little bit skatey in the wet, something to watch out for. So my final thoughts on this shoe are basically a blueprint, I think, for Brooks to be able to take this shoe from being good for most to great for most. So really it starts with that medial cutout. There's quite a bit of foam in here that could easily have been cut out instead of taking it out of this medial aspect. So if they left the foam in here and took the foam out of here and down further through this channel, I think what that would do is it would provide some stability here to keep for the shoe from tipping in. It would take away some weight by stripping some of the additional foam in here, and I don't think that would impact the stability on either side of this. You'd still leave a little bit of foam here to still guide you laterally through the foot strike. So we'd increase the stability, reduce the weight potentially, and by increasing the stability, it gives you the opportunity to take a lot of the weight away from this upper heel area of the shoe. You won't need as stiff of a heel counter in here because you're not needing to keep people sort of planted on the platform as it tips on them. So you can reduce the heel counter. You could probably reduce some of the padding down because without it being a really stiff heel counter, you don't need quite as thick of padding. You could decrease the thickness of this knit pretty easily because it is quite thick. It could be a little bit thinner. That's going to reduce some weight down. So overall, what you wind up with is a more democratic and potentially lighter shoe than what you started with. So I really think those couple of little changes in this shoe, like I said, would take this from being a shoe that's going to be really good for some people with the right mechanics to being really good for everybody. All right, so that's my 30-kilometer review of the Brooks Hyperion Max. Please remember to like and subscribe if you want to see some more shoe reviews and running content as it drops. Check out my channel as well. I've got some curated playlists on there that I pull together some of the better running material from across YouTube, from my years of training and looking at all the different things on YouTube. I try and curate those into lists to help you kind of absorb them a little bit better. So there are playlists on there for things like training, for technique, for fueling. I even have a playlist right now for beginner runners if you're just getting into running or coming back from running. So please check those out. And if you have any questions or comments, just leave them down in the comments box and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. But for now, let's get back out there and run.